This video was made possible by our generous supporters on Patreon. Check out patreon.com/NWR for all the details. During the 90s, as the 20th century was coming to a close, space combat sims suddenly became a hugely popular genre. While each one was unique, they generally involved some combination of full 6 degrees of freedom flight and combat, RPG mechanics, and a vast universe. Maybe it was the optimism about the 2000s which felt like a sci-fi future. Games like Wing Commander, X-Wing, TIE Fighter, and Free Space offered the thrill of 3D space combat, trade, and exploration to the gaming public. However, as the millennium turned over, these games went from mainstream to a niche. Over the last several years, space combat sims have slowly started to claw their way back to the surface, as the kids who grew up with them have started making their own. There is a huge number of these available on PC, but let's say you want to take your spacefaring on the go via your Nintendo Switch. Well, you're in luck. My name's John Reardon, and ever since the Switch launched, I've made sure to review every space combat sim released for the platform. I've also found a few games that don't quite fit in the genre, but may still scratch that itch. So here are 8 space combat games to play on Switch, and a few extra honorable mentions. So, in no particular order, here we go. Our first 4 games are mission-based. These present a linear set of missions rather than open progression. If you've got an itch for Rogue Squadron, these are your games. Subdivision Infinity DX. Subdivision Infinity is a level-based 3D space shooter with a single-player campaign spanning 5 environments and a total of 25 missions. Each level sees you dropped into a very large environment where you'll be tasked with flying to waypoints, shooting enemies, defending transports, and other fun activities. You're given full control of both rotation and movement along each axis, making this a full 6 degrees of freedom style space shooter. It's also a pretty good looking game, with nice crisp visuals and a variety of ships to purchase and fly. Subdivision Infinity doesn't exactly break the mold, but it does what it does very well. Next is Manticore: Galaxy on Fire. This game runs in much the same crowd as Subdivision Infinity, but with somewhat simpler controls. This may make it a bit less appealing if you're a longtime enthusiast, but if you're new to the genre or looking for a slightly more arcade-style experience, then this may be your game. It offers up a significantly longer campaign than Subdivision Infinity, and it can keep you busy for a very long time. It also has plenty of ships and weapons to purchase as you move through the campaign. This is probably the simplest game on this list, so if you're not a space sim veteran and just want to kind of give the genre a try, this might be a good one. Before we get to our other 2 mission-based space shooters, let's point out a couple of games that fans of this style of space combat sim may also enjoy. First up is Sublevel 0 Redux. Sublevel 0 may not take place in space, but it sure does have 6 degrees of freedom. It's inspired heavily by the 90s classic Descent. That means a maze-like environment to shoot your way through. Sublevel 0 is also procedurally generated, meaning that you'll never get the same level twice. Sky Rogue isn't a space sim at all, but it is a vaguely sci-fi flight combat game. Like Sublevel 0, Sky Rogue is procedurally generated, and that includes your mission objectives. There are plenty of planes and weapons to try out, and a nice variety of mission types to work your way through, not to mention a killer soundtrack. Alright, back to our mission-based space sims. Number 3 is Strike Suit Zero. While Strike Suit Zero is certainly still mission-based, the missions take place in wide open spaces, and while specific objectives are always indicated, the player is able to roam freely. It always feels like there's a grander battle going on around you, and it's up to you whether you stick to the plan or join in that greater battle. Objectives and mission types range from simple combat to bombing runs and more. You'll fight small individual ships, giant cannon-laden cruisers, and entire space stations. Along the way, you'll also unlock additional ships. Oh, and your ship can transform into a mech. Speaking of mechs, next up is Wartech Fighters. Wartech Fighters seeks to combine the Japanese mech fandom with Western space games. You'll engage enemy fighters, both other ships and mechs, overtake enemy installations, gather resources, defend your fleet, and more. Your war tech is also equipped with light and heavy cannons, missiles, a sword, and a shield. For the most part, you'll rely on your ranged weapons, with your melee options only becoming available when you engage an enemy mech at close range. These usually end in a ridiculous execution. While coming off as somewhat tongue-in-cheek, they also demonstrate a love of the absurdity of the genre. There is nothing like seeing your mech perform a flying sidekick through space to destroy an enemy spaceship. Alright, our second group is what I would call space RPGs. These games not only feature 3D space combat, but side quests and a full-on economy. First is Everspace. Everspace is a roguelite space shooter. You start with a basic ship and weapons and travel from sector to sector until your eventual demise. Each sector is randomly generated and populated with different resources to be gathered, along with wrecks and asteroids to explore. Amidst these locations are various factions, each with their own allegiances. Some will attack you on sight, others only when attacked, but all present a risk and a reward. Defeated enemies drop resources and money, along with weapons and gear for your ship. You'll also find stations where you can repair and buy goods, and side quests from various NPCs. When you die, you'll use whatever credits you earn to permanently upgrade your ship. Quick side note, the sequel to Everspace is currently in early access, and while it isn't currently planned for a Switch release, it is very much worth checking out if you have the means. Next up is Space Commander War and Trade. Space Commander is the most recent game on this list, having just recently released on Switch. It leans heavily into the economic side of a space RPG, with you constantly needing to carefully manage your money. But its most interesting feature is its squadron system. Buying new ships doesn't just give you more ships to choose from, but rather adds them to your party, who all actively fight alongside you in combat. It feels a bit like an action RPG in this regard. At any time, you can switch between ships or issue commands to the ones you aren't controlling. Each of your ships can also be customized and upgraded to your heart's content, as long as you have the cash in this game's very harsh economy. Quick break here for some honorable mentions. Hyperspace Delivery Service is Oregon Trail in space. It's light on real-time combat, but it is present. If your favorite part of space combat sim is the sim, then this is for you. Just watch out for the space dysentery. Battlestar Galactica Deadlock is a tactical space combat sim in which you command entire fleets in truly epic turn-based combat. If you're a Fire Emblem fan who just wants to try out space games, give this one a go. Alright, back to our space RPGs. Next is Starlink, Battle for Atlas, and I think it's safe to say that Starlink is probably the biggest budget game on this list, and the only one that can't be considered indie. Starlink was a Toys to Life game developed by Ubisoft, which on Switch was known for including the Star Fox team. But beneath all that is an expansive space combat sim that covers not just space, but planets, as well as a seamless open world. Starlink is all about fighting to reclaim planets and then setting up bases on them to help you take out enemies and reclaim the system. It is a much more in-depth game than it generally gets credit for, and it's worth checking out. Plus, the spaceship customization is hard to compete with, and don't worry, buying the digital version gets you all the ship parts with none of the extra plastic, though the plastic ships are pretty cool. Last, but definitely not least, is Rebel Galaxy Outlaw. If you heard me mention Wing Commander at the beginning of this video and got nostalgic, this is your game. Rebel Galaxy Outlaw is simultaneously a love letter to classic Wing Commander style games, whilst also being something entirely its own and outdoing its inspiration in many regards. This is probably the most expansive game on this list, with a huge universe to explore, tons of ships to find and purchase and upgrade, and a whole lot of aliens to play pool against. No, really, somehow this is one of the best ways to play pool on Switch. Don't ask me how. Rebel Galaxy Outlaw is a space combat sim for fans of the classics, and is probably my favorite game on this entire list. If you consider yourself a fan of this genre and haven't tried it yet, pick it up. This is an absolute gem of a game. Not to mention, it runs, looks, and sounds incredible on Switch. So what do you think? If you're interested in any of these games, I've reviewed all of them here on this channel or on NintendoWorldReport.com, with the exception of Battlestar Galactica Deadlock. We didn't receive a code for that, and I just bought it on a whim one day, but my review is that it is good. For any of the rest of these, check out my full reviews if you're interested, or just drop questions in the comments. You can also get in contact with me directly on Twitter by following me at JTSKnight92, and if you've played any of these, let me know what your favorites are. Thank you very much for watching. Once again, my name's John Raridan, and I will see you next time. This video was made possible by our generous supporters on Patreon. Did you know that Nintendo World Report is funded directly by fans like you? When you support Nintendo World Report on Patreon, you get immediate access to multiple exclusive podcasts every month, exclusive Discord channels, an early look at select content, and more, all for as little as $1 a month. Check out patreon.com/NWR for all the details.